So I'm Aid Taylor. I'm the we've got a slide with our pictures on, I think, haven't we? There we go, Ian.
There we go.
Ian's the glamorous assistant on the slides, because when I do it, it always goes wrong. So I'm Aid Taylor. I'm technical director of a company called Scrutiny. We are a managed security services provider. And Ian?
Yeah, so Ian Heritage, part of the Google Cloud team, focusing on Chronicle and also the Beyond Corp Enterprise product sets that we have, that we're going to be talking a bit about today as well. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Aid.
Thanks, Ian. Right, okay, if we can go to the next one, that would be great.
Perfect. So this is probably me,
yeah, straight
right?
over to you. Yeah, this is you, mate. So what I probably should have said on the first slide is actually, if you were at Big SASIG, you may well have seen a flavour of this, our little double act on Zero Trust, but it's been we've updated and refined it and compressed it. You may be pleased to learn. So hopefully there'll still be some interest to those of you that may have seen some of this before. But over to Ian to start.
Yeah, thanks, Aid. And like you said, it was a really packed agenda, but it was also a packed room at Big SASIG. And what we want to do for the first sort of 5 slides is really look at how in that room we looked at defining what Zero Trust was and how Google have been beyond on that journey, and looking to see how they can actually productionize and productize that solution to work with partners like Scrutiny and customers like yourselves to really look at how you might be looking to implement Zero Trust as it is. On the left-hand side, in that room, we discussed how Zero Trust for us, it's not another next generation perimeter. In terms of VPN modernization, Google went on a transformation to actually remove all VPNs and firewalls from our organization. It's definitely not a one-off project. So we looked at that people, processes, and technology. I know it's used a lot in DevOps. It's used a lot in any IT transformation and cloud journey, but it truly does need full support of the business to go on that. It's not infrastructure centric. So I don't think you should just be looking at certain devices to solve your Zero Trust journey. And we know that one tool will not fix all of your Zero Trust issues. Again, on the right-hand side, this is our definition, and we're going to be going a bit deeper into this, but it is an architectural state of mind. What we mean by that is that architecture needs to be taken to every single part of the business, but you can start off in maybe the call center or maybe one certain department, and then look at expanding that. We're speaking with some customers who are just looking at for their cloud estate. So maybe I'm transforming to the cloud, and that is going to be my Zero Trust architecture. Everything else beyond that is not trusted at all. No security difference between internet and intranet. At Google, we are all external users or treated as external users, and I'll go into a bit about that. Now, people, process, and technology, again, it's coined that triad of those principles. They all go hand in hand. There's various different ones below there as well, but I think that towards the bottom, the understanding of both assets, assets from a risk point of view is absolutely key. Matthew mentioned it's one of those not so important subjects or one that we all want to talk about, but risk and assets is one of those. Identifying your attack surface is one that was definitely, I was at InfoSec for 3 days, and that was a hot topic that everyone was discussing about. Data flows that start from users, applications, and devices. If you can get all of those 3 right, talking to each other, it's going to be beneficial to you. And you will not be unfamiliar to protecting your data. Data protection is one of the key tenets of all security these days. Now, in the room at Big SASIG, we started to talk about the Google journey. So Google have been on a 7-year journey since 2011 to have every employee work from an untrusted network without a VPN. So when I'm working from home, I don't have to join a VPN. I'm an untrusted employee until I join certain accesses that I can authenticate to. My device is then monitored, not necessarily monitored, but it's actively, I know the posture of that device, so I can connect to certain resources that allow me permission. Gone are the gated days of, you're entered into a trusted network and then you have access to all of this, all of these servers, all of these cloud resources. Now, in terms of that journey, I've tried to summarize it on this slide, but we did start in 2011. Largely, firstly, in eliminating those VPNs to develop that internal, to remove the need for that. Our zero trust principle is trust nothing. So as I said before, connecting from that particular network must not determine the services that you're going into. So as an example, I connect to a certain corporate network and maybe all of those are via RDP or something like that, and then you've got access to all of the servers. Essentially, we know that that won't work because we know loss of credentials is one of the biggest, if not one of the most challenging things that security professionals deal with today. And access to services must be authenticated, authorized, and encrypted. So we must be using, well-established TLS. Again, this is why we know that, VPNs were so widely adopted with the remote working capabilities there even before that. But we know those encrypted tunnels do not go away. And again, there's no perimeter. And this may sound scary, but effectively we've worked on that, and we can definitely sing the praises that it does work if you go on that journey. Now, some when we're having these conversations, and especially I think Aid will testify to this, is that sometimes we get, well, you're Google, you can do all of this beyond trust, and it must be easy for you. Again, it was a journey, but what we've worked really heavily on is to really look how we can offer that out to customers like yourselves and through partners like Security to really do two tenets of security, and this is detect everything and trust nothing. Then we've got two products. I'm not going to talk specifically about the speeds and feeds, but the value of Chronicle and Beyond Corp, which are the two tenets of our product set that we'll be touching on today, is Chronicle will take in telemetry from all of your security sources or all of your IT resources internally. And you can see here, it's all about providing security analytics in real time. This is a cloud native SIM hosted alongside Google Search, so the likes of Google Search, Google Photos, so it's using the same core infrastructure, and it's using the same scalability that we live and breathe each day at Google. So you can go back 365 days in hot storage very easily to look at all of your data from a security perspective. And we're working really successfully with partners like Security to do that investigation, detection, and hunting to really hunt down the threat actors in there, in networks that we know don't just stay in or haven't have been in a network for maybe 10 days. We know that our hot storage being online for 365 days, that dwell time of 166 days of the average breach these days, you need to go back and forth and find what's happened. And then the trust nothing. We looked at how we developed our white paper based on a previous attack 9 years ago from Aurora. You can go out there and read all of the dark reading reports. But effectively, we wanted to look at how we could productionize and productize those learnings. You can go out there and read the Beyond Corp paper of how we established the foundational elements of this. But as we know, we want to provide you that journey of what we are able to offer to the market today. A few points on our journey. It did take 7 years, but from a product point of view, Beyond Corp, we're not asking you to take a 7-year investment in going on that journey. It's very much a staged process. We do not expect anyone to do a rip and replace. It would simply not work, and even for the likes of Google. In 2011, we were 32,000 employees, and now we're actually at 175,000 employees now, as I just looked on our system. And my point there is that you need something that can grow and scale, and this is why the likes of Scrutiny are working with us to develop these solutions for customers like yourselves. And understanding the landscape, identifying the assets. You can't start off with zero trust if you don't know your assets, and achieving that zero trust model is that small step, and you can use small steps in use cases, which we will go into. But what I want to do now is just pass over to Abe, because he had some sort of views and observations from Security and how zero trust could impact things like ransomware and how that could really eject it from the network. But I'm not going to steal any of Abe's thunder, and over to you. So I'm
Thanks,
driving
Ian.
the slide, so just tell me to hit next when you I'll do next now, right?
Next now, that'd be great. Thank you, Ian. So we, I think it's zero trust is a thing that's been around for quite a while, right? As Ian mentioned, 2011 was when Google, who are of course largely responsible for the invention of some of this terminology, started on that journey. And so it's in danger of becoming one of those things. I mean, we hear it everywhere, right? And if you were at InfoSec this week, I'm sure you will have seen a huge amount of it. And congratulations for getting your voice back, by the way, Ian, from your post InfoSec. I was a bit worried about that. And so I thought, okay, let's talk a little bit about, okay, what does that, what's the point, right? Over and above, it's a nice model to try and aspire to, right? So I thought, okay, so what's really relevant and top of people's minds at the moment? It's ransomware. I think ransomware, again, it's been around a long time, but it shows absolutely no signs of going away. It's getting, the attackers are getting cleverer. We, at any one time, our incident response team is always dealing with a ransomware issue somewhere for somebody, literally all the time these days. And so if we highlight some of the issues with ransomware, and then talk a little bit about, okay, so if we had the benefit of a zero trust and we managed to move to a zero trust model, in the real world, what does that mean for something typical like ransomware? How does it actually help? Because all of this stuff takes time and money to do, and it's very worthwhile, I think, to have some very specific aims and benefits in mind if you're going to start going along this journey. Ransomware, there's some big numbers there, right? Yeah, it depends whose numbers you believe, but it's going to be worth a lot of money in terms of the costs to the industry by 2024. And the interesting stat there's about 1 million stats that I could have put up about ransomware. The interesting one, I think, is that massive increase in encrypted ransomware. So, encryption is one of those things that I think they're a bit like the government making us all drive diesel cars a few years ago. There's been a bit of a double-edged sword effect to making sure we encrypt everything everywhere. And one of those unintended consequences is that we have encouraged attackers to make their attacks invisible effectively, which is nice, but it's a problem, and we need to address it. And so what are the problems, right? So with traditional mechanisms, very difficult to control. As I've put at the bottom there, networks were designed to support lateral movement. That's kind of what they're for, right? So the fast movement of data between machines is pretty much what traditional network infrastructures, be they local data center, remote access, whatever they are designed to do. That is the entire point of them. So actually, we're now looking at them with a new lens and saying, oh, actually, that facilitates everybody working, and that's what they're for. But it's also really quite dangerous from the point of view of some malware. And you can put point solutions in place, right? And that for a long time is kind of how the security industry, I'm very old, I've worked in this business a long time, and it's kind of what happened for a very long time is that a new product emerged, it fixed a particular problem for a period of time, and it was very popular and everybody rolled it out, and technologies were invented like application firewalling and like signatureless endpoint protection, and advances were made in areas, in very discrete areas of security protection, which helped, but they're point solutions and they get overcome, and then a new challenge emerges which isn't fixed by the point solution, and then we spent a long time waiting for vendors and technologies to get better so that we could address the new problems, and there's no end to it, right? There's absolutely no end to it. So we need to do something, I think, as a methodology, and this is partly, thanks, Ian, that's brilliant timing. This is where zero trust, I think, shines, right? The zero trust model. So at the top there is a typical simple analysis of a ransomware anatomy, something we're probably all very familiar with. And what I've represented underneath there is there are some things which zero trust will help with. They're the green ticks. And there are some things which it won't help with. And the point of this slide is to impress upon everybody that even if you do deploy a zero trust model, you still have to think about security as a challenge in the whole, right? So zero trust, whilst it can address a lot of the underlying vulnerabilities, and in fact it makes a lot of underlying vulnerabilities in networks and in particular irrelevant, because you're removing yourself from an environment where malware and malicious actors can operate. It's still not a complete solution. You still have to do other things, right? And an endpoint in particular. So you still ransomware. You could still lose all the data on a machine, right? In an ideal world, you're Google. You've deployed zero trust. An individual machine or a small number of machines, the user could still click on the link. You could still get ransomware. Still get your drive encrypted. Still lose your data. That is a problem which is not addressed by one model, right? But the point is, if we can stop the lateral movement and we can stop that malicious software being able to discover the existence of other machines, spread to those machines, encrypt data on in other machines or in data centers, and then we can stop the process of elevating, for example, elevating user rights to be able to do that, or we can at least have visibility of that and decide whether we're going to stop it or not. We can stop unapproved connections from users and applications to data, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're saying it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what machine you're on, you have a set of permissions which controls your access at not just a point in time, but continually between the user, the data, and the applications. And if you can do those things, then you can prevent, perhaps not all malware. That's kind of a bit of it's not a panacea, but you can prevent it spreading beyond your control. And crucially, you have visibility of it, right? Sorry, and could you go to the next slide for me, please?
Sure.
So how does it actually help? So you move focus to data and applications. It's not about where machines are. It's not about which network they're using. And those two things alone reduce attack surface enormously. It also increases flexibility. So you don't, with your super important, super secure data, you don't have to impose restrictions on where that data can be accessed from, or what types of physical environments the people that use that data need to be in. And perhaps most importantly of all, that we assume we assume compromise. We assume that trust nothing tenant that Ian mentioned. We assume that everybody is bad, right? That everything until proved otherwise is compromised. Can I go to the next one, please, Ian? Thank you. So we inspect all traffic. That's important. Easier said than done, right? But we need to have visibility of everything everywhere at all times, and that is one of the ways in which we address this threat of encrypted malicious actors and encrypted malware. We stop lateral movement entirely. It's just not possible to go, your machine, your applications, you as a user do not even know about the existence of other assets on your network unless you are explicitly authorized continually to see them, right? It's the traditional method of the network stack doing something which the user is unaware of is just in a fully implemented zero trust model. It's not possible, right? We remove the problems of inherited trust. The very traditional method of adding a user to a group because they work in the same team as the person who they're modeled on. So over time, you get this creep of permissions. You may have certain levels of access and permissions associated with the machine because it happens to belong to a person in a certain team, or they happen to be in a certain place. Very traditional methods of administering networks and users and machines, which have grown up over time, through necessity, because actually that's the only way you could effectively manage the additional removal of people and machines from teams and environments. And then crucially, there is a one-to-one relationship between the user and the data. You know, just because you have used that data before, or you have access, maybe you've created that data. It doesn't mean that you have access to administer or create or amend that data today, actually at 12 o'clock, that you did at 11 o'clock this morning, right? And it's that continual assessment of you and your environment and your conditions and what it is you're trying to do, which is where visibility of your assets, your data, your applications, and all of those events is absolutely crucial, which is, you know, why Chronicle is such an enormous player for us. Google Chronicle as our SIEM is such an enormous player for us in this space because it enables us to do that. Thank you. So just in summary, right, so if you're going to do this, we will give you some practical advice. Ian's going to give you some practical advice about how to start shortly. That, like you said, there's no big bang approach to this. But if you're going to do this, there's some things to keep in mind here. And what we're trying to get to is granular control, right? So for that, we need the visibility, we need a system of record, and we need to know what our assets are. By assets, I don't mean, as I'm sure you understand, I don't mean like things, I mean everything: data, people, locations, devices, the whole shebang. Thanks, Ian.
Perfect.
So how do we go about it? And this is what, actually, you're right, Ian. Sorry, just to interrupt you, you're right.
No.
Lots of people said to me, and do say to me when we do these things, like, okay, well, Google have got 170,000 people, 175,000 now, because it's a week later. Easy for them, right? Because out of those 175, they've probably got, what, 100,000 developers. But the point is, you don't need to have that scale or to work at that scale in order to implement it. You don't have to have those resources. So Ian's going to talk to us a little bit about what we could do.
Yeah, thanks, Aid. And yeah, just touching on that ransomware example is, you know, a core tenet of what I hear from customers and partners. It's the cyber criminals want to go out there and get as much money as possible, right? And the key thing is, we as IT professionals got really good at things like backup and hygiene for our endpoints. But as you said, they've started to be more descriptive and understanding of who their targets are. And it's not just a spray attack, it's very targeted these days. So they will go after the people who will pay for the data. But once they're into an organization, they do need to move laterally for that high impact. And we're also seeing that even if data is being encrypted, it's also being exfiltrated, and then double extortion or triple extortion is then being enacted upon these organizations, unfortunately, and that's how they're criminalizing things as well. We're also seeing destruction ransomware. I'll be honest, like, it's not just, you know, it's about disrupting organizations as well, but that's a different side. You know, you've got the cyber criminals and sort of almost the nation states to try and impact some of these organizations. But as a practical starting point, you know, as I've said, I'm not going to touch too much on product. This will sort of cement some of the key facts here, but I think, you know, going back to that, I want you to come away from this presentation and think, well, how would I start and where would I start? You know, there are three tenets that we've talked about: eliminating privileged networks, centering the users and devices in understanding what things should be granted and what should be accessed. So, you know, is an individual allowed to go to something like Workday if they're on holiday? Or can I observe certain techniques where they've opened a Word document and they're copying and pasting into certain environments where I don't want to approve? And also enforcing that continuous authorization. So, you know, being in an untrusted network, we don't want to be enforcing two-factor authentication at every stage just because they've changed network location. This is all about making sure that you're taking in telemetry from given sources, understanding the risks, and making enforced judgments on when you should provide that reauthorization. So Beyond Corp Enterprise is essentially, you know, in 2011, we didn't have a product, right? We had to go out and engineer a solution. Google is an engineering company. But working with customers who had needs out there in the market today, we've known that things like COVID has sped up the need for remote workers. And we know that things like bring your own devices is key, but you can't necessarily install all of the applications that you need for that secure environment. So we've worked with various different customers, whether that be developers out there where they're bringing their own laptops to an organization and they are completely untrusted to an organization, and you want to make sure that they're not exfiltrating any code or any confidential information if they're working on certain apps. The key part of that journey is that we specify the web apps that they're using, and making sure that they can only access things when they are needed to. Maybe you've got frontline workers that you might need to protect payment or block certain employees from surfing particular sites. Maybe you've got call centers out there and your PII data is absolutely key. And again, securing those records, it comes back to those data parts. So Beyond Corp Enterprise is taking the ability for you to use any application, any user, and any device with both our Beyond Corp Enterprise and our Chrome Enterprise experience. So I'm sure out there today, you're used to using things like Chrome browser, but Chrome browser has so many different elevations of management, where you can manage certain profiles and add in the elements that we can build into that secure journey for implementing a zero trust security solution. So as an example, I'm working with a customer at the moment. They've got bring your own devices. They use a Chrome browser with managed profiles, and we can layer upon Beyond Corp Enterprise controls on that to make sure that they can only access certain applications at certain given times from that secured browser. But we can also make sure that, if they want to elevate or if they want more trusted access, maybe we actually have to send them out a device with certain things installed. So maybe it needs a CrowdStrike endpoint installed on it to guard against the certain abilities there, and detect certain parts of what's happening. So in terms of how we're looking at our Beyond Corp message out to the market today, it's understanding the user, the device, and security at various different stages, but bringing that into a solidified way of making sure that we're putting in the right signals in there. I'm not going to talk about all of the features and functions, but you need to be identifying something like user and understanding the role. So this is all about identity, knowing where they're logging in from. So I'm always asked, can you demonstrate things like impossible travel? I don't want a certain user to be logging in from a certain location in a given time. So can you lock down your user context to certain regions and detect that in quick succession? Can you identify credential strength? So if someone's typing in a username and password to an unsecured site or something like that, could you flag up to say, actually, you've done that and you need to now change your username and password. And actually, we're now not going to trust you until you do that because your username and password has been compromised. Also, for the user context, if you are maybe logging into a different location, or we identify that maybe you're logging in from an internet cafe or something like that, or Starbucks or any other coffee shop that's available, we want to re-authenticate you with your multi-factor authentication, or maybe you're using things like a Titan key, which is a security device where you can plug in and touch. The key thing is that we're not doing every single session. We're getting the context from that user experience, but also if you want to go for more of a linked method here, the user and device context is absolutely key. So again, most vulnerabilities these days are not 0-day. They are exploiting already in the wild patchable systems that, unfortunately, as we know as security professionals, patching is not necessarily easy. It's not that there's methodologies to do it, but we know that certain users will not patch their certain devices. Maybe if they're going into presentation and they want to just do their presentation, so they select skip or do later or something like that. OS version and type is really important there to make sure that they're up to date. Device postures, so maybe as I said before, does it have certain endpoints installed? Does it have application control? Does it have encryption? Things like that. Chrome postures, this is sort of a preview feature, but making sure that it's actually locked down for certain elements. So we know that users are using Chrome, they might be using extensions, and you might want to stop maybe Tor exit nodes from being used as a Chrome extension that someone's installing, or certain given extensions that are just not corporately owned. A lot of people don't know that is there. So think of group policy, but Chrome for group policy. There's a set of management profiles that you can add, which is really interesting. I already mentioned it, partner and customer signals. This is why getting all of those telemetry from all of those different signals and integrating it. So, as I said about before about endpoint solutions, is it at a certain profile speed? Does it enter a certain threshold? Has it got up-to-date signatures or the latest version that is installed? And also on the right-hand side, it's bringing in the security context. So within Chrome browser itself, we can actually add in things like malware prevention and phishing prevention to add in those detections. From maybe a consumer point of view, you already see that today where you're using it, but we can add extra abilities where you're downloading a certain file from a certain ungiving location, and we can scan it before it's actually presented to the actual user. Hidden secret of Google, we are in VirusTotal, and VirusTotal adds in a lot of that telemetry. We see a lot of signals from our mobile phones and things like that from credential loss. So we will check all of these different signals, and this is all about bringing those contexts all into one place. And how we're wrapping that is with Beyond Corp Enterprise, and that's leveraging the scale of what I said before, Google Cloud and our networks, to give you that environment. So we're not asking you to put in new appliances or new firewalls or new point solutions in your certain given networks. There are some variations where you might want to use maybe a full-blown app. So there are definitely ways that we can do private apps. But Google went on this journey to really try and do everything web-based. Everything has to be SAML2 authenticated, and I would say that most SaaS applications are going that way today. But it's important to understand that our journey is understanding the user device. So we've got that agentless experience with the Chrome browser. And there's probably going to be some questions here. Well, what if I use a different browser? We definitely can take that into account. No man in the middle. So we're not looking at decrypting traffic because we're actually in the Chrome browser itself. We can do a lot of the offloading of security policies onto the device. So someone asked me, well, I'm typing in username and password. Do you need to decrypt that first? Well, no, because we're in the Chrome browser. We can do a lot of that heavy lifting. And again, this is where my voice is going, Aid. Let me just have a quick sip. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk constantly for 3 days, it's gonna...
Yeah, so infosec for 3 days does not help, right? And I'm passionate, which also doesn't help. So Windows, Mac, OS, Linux, and Chrome is something we support. I'll go into our global edge, but working with a zero trust solution, you're sort of leveraging, a global network to be doing some of the, the equivalent of a proxying of the connection. So making sure that you're in a trusted network, there is some network connectivity to make sure that the policies are correct. So we leverage Google Edge for that. And Google Cloud is the enforcement mechanism there. So making sure that we've got that SAML2 authentication sort of offloaded to certain applications. As again, I said, if you're going to access Workday or Office 365 or, or Google Suite as a customer of us, then, we're looking at doing that. And again, the third-party context signal integration. So the likes of CrowdStrike, the Sentinel ones, the Mandiant type of parts there. There are so many different signals that we can input there. And then moving on to the Google Cloud piece, this is really where your applications are sitting. So, where we've gone on to that approach where we are now external users, we're hoping that every single application that we use, every single application we use in Google is pretty much defined as a web solution. So therefore, we can provide that SAML 2.0 authentication. But again, working with customers of different depth and breadth in terms of scale and journey to the cloud, we know that the likes of a data center, we can definitely provide resourcing there to add in devices like reverse proxying. But the first step to Beyond Corp, as again I said, it's people, technology, and process. it's it's really about understanding where your applications sit. As I said, the scale and capacity of that global network, so we own pretty much all of the C cables that you can see here, is low latency, so you know that that backbone is not going to cause latency. The problem that I always had where, you know, you're putting in a web proxy solution, do you have point of presence in that region to provide that internet speed that we all expect as users of the internet today? You need to be working with solutions that can provide that. And by working with a global backbone, hopefully you experience a really good service today from, you know, your Google queries and Google search. That's the equivalent of what we want to provide in those respects today. I did a whistle stop tour through all of those features, but without that backbone, you're not able to do those user context, device context, and security context in, you know, at fast speed, because we don't want to be putting barriers. Barriers just stop people, and they provide, you know, they go for other ways. Like you saw at InfoSec this week, like they block one door, so you go to the next door, but someone will always find a way of getting around that certain person or certain process there. And it's the same within IT, right? We don't want to put in those barriers. We don't want to be that security of no and prevent those. So talked a lot. Why Beyond Corp Enterprise? Again, it's not a product pitch or anything like that. This is just a process, and you could take this process to any zero trust concept, but this is really giving you that tenet of going out there. If you did want to experience it, then you can come to us and speak to Security, who are a delivery partner for us to provide that. But it's giving that team that secure access to your critical apps, safeguarding them with that built-in threat prevention, but also data protection. So things like DLP and copy and pasting between certain applications is needed. And yeah, increasing that security posture is absolutely key. So those three tenets: have security, trust in your network. I'm sure you're thinking about it. Base all that access on decisions on what you know about the user and device, you know, not on common. So it goes back to that assets. And migrate carefully is not to break existing users, because if you start breaking things, then it goes back to, you know, we need to do something else. So again, that detect everything, trust nothing approach is that, you know, some customers of mine today just start off with that Chronicle piece. They just want to take in all of their security telemetry, get a baseline, and work with someone like Chronicle and work with someone like Security to take all of that together. But we know, I'd say over the next 5 years, everyone's going to be looking, if not moving, you know, away from that, you know, the VPN nature of things, because it's been limiting, right? We saw that at the start of lockdown, where we all needed to order new you know, new VPN concentrators because we didn't have enough capacity. You know, we know that Google first, that cloud first approach is definitely needed, and that's where we're here to support you. So again, I appreciate I talk very fast. Hopefully that's a digestible amount of information, but yeah, we can open it up to questions, Matthew, if there are any. Hopefully that was okay.
Thanks, Ian. I'm glad your voice held out, as did my screen this time. So I was able to watch the whole thing. So whatever happened there, I don't know. I'm gonna have to check all that afterwards. Trust no one. That of us of a certain age, that makes me think of the X-Files. But yeah, I think when we think about what I was hearing from what you said there, yeah. It's clearly recognised for a lot of us in the industry, you know, why it's important, but it is not that silver bullet. It is still defence in depth and not relying on that. We do have a question which I'll come to shortly while anybody else thinks of anything else. But what I was thinking, you know, what organisations? I mean, this sounds fantastic, but what do organisations really need to be aware of if they are embarking on such a process? You know, what are the sort of, where does it go wrong, or you know, what sort of learnings are there for us that might think, what do we need to go in with our eyes wide open about?
So Ian, shall I just do my sort of overview? Go for it. Yeah, and then you can.
And my screen stopped sharing, by the way, right? You can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, you're good.
So I think one of the major problems is of customers that we talk to is knowing where to start, which is why we tried to theme this a little bit about, and it's why we're trying to focus some of we're writing some other sort of communications about, okay, where it sounds great, where do I start, right? Because people have got big networks, or even if they don't, they've got complex environments that have grown up over time. So I think mistake number one is trying to think of it as a really big thing that you have to do in a short period of time, and you just don't, because every time you take a small step towards the goal, you're slightly reducing your attack surface, right? So even if it takes you a very long time, you're actually improving things. And maybe start with something completely new. So start with say, okay, I'm going to implement this new application or this new group of users or this new business function, whatever it is, and I'm going to start with a zero trust model. So I'm going to do this new thing in a zero trust way, and perhaps don't get too caught up on trying to retrofit back into your environment. And also, you know, it's a methodology. So although Google, Google were very instrumental in the in the early days of this and the developing of zero trust for kind of real world environments. There are lots of things you can do that don't involve technology, right? There are lots of steps you can take, probably with your existing technology, just by rethinking, reconfiguring, and changing what you have, right? So don't, I guess that's the thing, don't look at it as a massive thing that you're just never going to get done. And if you do it, it goes wrong.
Thanks. Right, well, while we were going through that, we did have a question, and Paul Simmons has added another one just now. So this came up whilst Ada, you were talking about the inspection of network traffic. So Paul was asking, how do you inspect all traffic when it's encrypted and you do not own the network?
Yeah, so there are issues, obviously, with that. I mean, you can, so it depends entirely on the environment. If you don't own it, you may not own the network, but you probably own the destination, right? So, or you have some control over the destination. So it's about how you route that traffic to the destination. So whether you do that with some kind of, I guess the old-fashioned language would be proxy or gateway, or whether you do that with endpoint, with inspection on the endpoint. There are a number of ways to do it. It's sometimes a bit of a network engineering challenge, but I'd say it's a case-by-case thing, right? You can't, there is no kind of one-size-fits-all. Don't forget, that's a goal, right? So the goal is to try to be able to inspect all of your traffic, and sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes that's not possible, but you can certainly treat the traffic that you can inspect in a way which is compliant with the zero trust model. I don't know, Ian, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's heavily reliant on, depending on customer, but, taking a zero trust customer from the Beyond Corp side, we heavily, want to rely on things that are existing in the operating system. So Chrome is something we heavily, leverage for certain controls and security controls. But, we are not here to, replace every single control. It's all about taking that security telemetry. So we know that endpoint is really good at doing browser, web reputation and things like that. So is Chrome from a certain element, because we get to see those elements. I'd say when you sort of look at that, inspecting all traffic is actually inspecting all traffic that matters to you as well. Because, for example, I'm not going to expect every single part of my experience to the internet, but for the core end to end, I know that that's a trusted connection, because I know that I've established the trust via TLS and via my IDP, the integrated logon part is that you've established that, and Beyond Corp can really signal that part as well. So, and
also, I mean, the traditional way, sorry, I was going to say, the traditional way that we do that is going away, right? So the traditional, which is why endpoint all studying was just talking about, is so important, because the traditional way of doing traffic inspection with effectively what is it's breaking SSL, right? It's a man in the middle attack in a kind of traditional network environment. That's probably not going to be possible for very much longer, right? I mean, that's not going to be a thing we can do. So yeah, you're quite right, Ian.
Yeah. Thank you. Paul also had a question around where would you not implement a zero trust methodology? Is there any way you wouldn't?
I guess there are some challenges with certain environments. We were speaking to, an OT customer, operational technology, where certain protocols or certain, heavy apps will never fit something. But I would say that, even speaking to those customers, there are certain environments where they've been living and breathing zero trust to a concept. It hasn't been called that, but, application control, the baselining of something and not allowing, the allow list and block lists, you could argue that is a zero trust methodology.
There's some applications and environments, and OT was the thing I was going to say as well. Actually,
okay.
There are some applications and environments where the telemetry just does not support. Just can't get the data out of them to make the decisions about entitlement. And to be honest, they exist, but there's normally something you can do, right? So there's normally a way to at least improve your capability of making those decisions. But yeah, it's not a one size fits all, right? And I think that's the kind of message is it's a goal, right? Implementing it is a goal. So maybe start with something where it is supported, reduces that attack surface, and take other measures with the legacy stuff or stuff that just doesn't work, because not everything will work in this environment.
I guess what I'm hearing, you cherry pick and almost make a risk-based decision. And what would work in your environment. Stuart Kerr has asked, firstly says thanks. One key concern we have is ransomware completely shutting down business operations. So interesting to hear how Zero Trust can help prevent this. If the enterprise Zero Trust solution was compromised, is it theoretically possible to deny access to everything for all users, i.e. effectively quasi-shut down business operations just in a different way, or would this not be possible?
Yeah.
Thanks, Stuart.
Great. Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Thanks for the comment, Stuart. I would say, it's all about that detect everything, trust nothing part, is that you need those signals to be going on. Even from a login point of view, I think you're talking about maybe you get administrative access to a certain location and you turn off all of these certain controls. Well, there's going to be flags going off left, right, and center before you even do that. I'm a great fan of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and if you look at the whole compromise of a ransomware attack, usually it's someone losing their credentials in a phishing attack. And if you can block that, first phishing attack, then that's the part there. But actually, if you see someone spreading laterally with using, living off the land tools such as Process Monitor or all of these different types of utilities and dumping credentials with common tools, or Mimikatz being run up and down, it's all about taking that telemetry. And you can probably talk about scenarios there, but without it's almost like CCTV, right? Like if you don't have the right CCTV in the certain right locations, then you're not going to be able to, tell someone how your house was burgled, unfortunately. But for me, it's pointing things in the right direction, getting the signals, and then getting it to talk to those parts. So.
And I think theoretically, absolutely, in theory, everything could be compromised, right? And we've seen that with this sort of interesting trend in source compromise, with supply chain compromise, which it's possible, right? And I guess it's probably we would say, and Ian would probably support the fact that it would probably be very difficult to render Chronicle, for example, which is where we get all our telemetry from our managed customers, to render it unusable globally. But hey, anything's possible. And I guess in those kind of scenarios, it's about how you design your environment to work when those things are not available, what the kind of fail safes are. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we should have had, Ian, you're right, there are ways, there are places, lots and lots of places to detect those kind of attacks before that kind of wholesale compromise happens. But I would never say never. That's very dangerous thing for me to say.
I never say never for anything.
No, exactly, yeah.
in what we do. I've got one last question at the moment from James Davenport. I'm sorry, James, if this is my understanding. Hopefully the guys who are presenting today will understand the context, but it's how to tell if a transaction is important. And I must confess, I'm not quite sure the context of that.
I'm sort of hesitating, but yeah.
Does it? And forgive me if I get it wrong, but I think, you know, this is about your knowing your assets and knowing your environment and associating your, you know, I guess we could call the crown jewels of your environment. You know, what your important. All data is important, but it's the importance of having this exercise where you understand what your sensitive data is, where it is, what your business critical data is, where it is, and then associating those transactions with that data or those users. You know, and we do some very traditional, I guess, very nicely implemented these days in terms of the, you know, the machine learning behind them, but we do some very traditional things like you know, with VIP identification and critical traffic identification based on what application that traffic is connected to, what user is using it, what environment they're in, you know, and lots of other stuff over the top, which might even relate to the day of the week or the you know, the time in the quarter for the customer. You know, once you have all that telemetry, literally anything is possible. And but this is where, you know, we can't, the customer needs to work with us to understand what you want to extract from the data. It's about data exploitation.
I've just in the follow-up from James as well. So how can you detect it? Is a finance system transaction an expense claim or a £5 million payment? I think from a zero trust point of view, it's making the judgment on, is this user even allowed access to the finance system to do anything, or the expense system to do certain profiles. So it's profiling the user and behavior. So if they've just logged onto a website and lost their credentials, then I'm going to break the access there. Or if they might have logged into Google Drive and they're starting to, you know, do things that just are not uncommon, then it's the signals element there. But yeah, it's
and it's also with the telemetry, right? It gives you, so we have you know, implemented similar things to this, and I guess, you know, maybe only a partial answer to the question, but yeah, has that user made a £5 million payment before? You know, and how many times have they done it, and did they do it in the same machine, and all the other signals related to what Ian was just saying. You know, have we had any security alerts for that person in the last 24 hours? You know, there's a whole load of stuff that you can combine, but it is absolutely dependent on that telemetry. Maybe the application, the finance application itself, can send us some telemetry which tells us it's a £5 million payment and not an expenses claim. You know, if we can get the telemetry, then we can treat it differently. But that is, yeah, it's some work, right? It really is.